He did not even say a word before the divorce papers fell onto her hospital blanket. Eleanor was trapped, unable to move a single muscle. She was trying to recover from 3 broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and a shattered pelvis. She had been imagining the moment Grant would arrive, take her hand, and tell her that it would all be all right. Instead, he brought a legal document. He told her to sign it now, while the medication kept her from feeling the pain. Then he looked at his watch, not just once, but twice, treating her like she was just another meeting in his busy day. But Grant made a huge mistake that day. He had no clue who his wife's long-lost father really was. That man was a secret trillionaire. Grant did not know this father had been watching him from a distance for 15 years. He also did not know that 6 months earlier, this very same father had secretly bought Grant's entire company. Every single dollar Grant had stolen, every secret bank account he had, and every lie he had ever told had been carefully written down. So what happens when a man who thinks he is on top of the world finds out he is just a pawn in a game run by someone else? You need to keep watching to find out, because the moment Grant steps into that boardroom and sees who is truly in charge will blow your mind. But first, let's talk about the lesson in this story. Sometimes the key to our own freedom has been right in front of us the whole time. We believe we are stuck, not because we are actually trapped, but because we are too scared to leave. The people who cause us pain rely on our fear. They expect us to stay quiet. They want us to believe that our worth is only what they tell us it is. This story is for every woman who was ever made to feel small. It is for anyone who has stayed in a bad situation because leaving seemed impossible. It is for anyone who needs to be reminded that learning to ask for help is not a weakness. It is the first move you make towards getting your life back. The papers to end their marriage landed on her hospital bed before her husband even said a single word. Eleanor Whitmore could not move at all. She was dealing with 3 broken ribs, a lung that had collapsed, and a pelvis that was broken in multiple places. For 3 whole days, she had been lying in that bed, just wishing Grant would reach for her hand. She hoped he would promise her that everything was going to be fine. She was hoping the man she loved for 12 years would finally behave like a real husband. But instead, he arrived with papers to end their marriage. Grant simply stood at the end of her bed, dressed in his perfectly tailored Italian suit. His tie was perfectly knotted, and his shoes were so shiny you could see your reflection in them. He seemed less like a man visiting his hurt wife and more like a businessman about to finalize a big contract. He said she should sign the documents right away, while the pain medicine was still in her system. Then he glanced down at his expensive watch, not once, but twice, as if she were just another item on his packed calendar. But Grant Whitmore made a terrible error in judgment that day. He did not know his wife had a father she hadn't talked to in years, a father who happened to be a secret trillionaire. He was not aware that this father had been observing him for the last 15 years. And just 6 months ago, that same father had quietly purchased every last part of Grant's company, every single stolen dollar, every hidden account, and every single lie Grant had ever told had been recorded in detail. What happens when a man who thinks he is untouchable discovers he is just a piece in a much larger game, run by someone with unlimited resources? And what happens when a woman who thought she had lost everything finds out she has all the power she needs to take back her life? This is more than just a tale of getting even. This is a tale about a woman who thought she needed a hero to rescue her, only to realize she could save herself, all by herself. You will want to see this story through to the end, because the moment Grant walks into that boardroom and sees his wife sitting in the main chair will leave you completely shocked. The fluorescent lights in the hospital room buzzed quietly above her. The heart monitor beeped with a steady, even rhythm. The morphine machine clicked every few seconds, pushing another wave of numbness into her arm. For 72 hours, she had looked up at the ceiling, counting the tiles, just waiting for Grant to show up. The crash had happened on a Tuesday afternoon. A drunk driver had sped through a red light and crashed right into the driver's side of Eleanor's car. She could still hear the awful sound of metal bending and breaking. She could still feel the sensation of the entire world turning upside down. She remembered coming to in the emergency room, hearing doctors yelling out numbers that had no meaning to her. 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, a fractured pelvis. The surgery had lasted for 6 hours. The doctor told her it would take at least 3 months for her to recover. And during all of that time, Grant never came. On the very first day, he had flowers delivered. They were a cheap bouquet from the hospital gift shop. The card just said, "Thinking of you. Get well soon." He did not even sign his name or promise to come and see her. They were just flowers that were already beginning to look sad and droopy. On the second day, he sent her a text. He said he was very busy with work meetings, but would try to visit her the next day. Now, it was the third day, and Grant was finally here. But he was not here to give her comfort. He was not here to hold her hand, or brush the hair from her face, or say that he loved her. He was here to end their marriage. Eleanor looked at the thick brown envelope that was resting on her blanket. The words printed across the front of it seemed to blur in front of her. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Irreconcilable differences. "I have been thinking about things," Grant said. His voice was the same cool, professional tone he always used during his work presentations. "I believe this is the best time for us to go our separate ways." Eleanor made an effort to sit up, but a sharp, intense pain shot through her entire chest. She gasped for air and collapsed back onto her pillows. "Grant," she whispered. Her voice was scratchy and quiet from not being used. "What are you talking about?" He moved a chair closer to her bed, not so he could be near her, but so he could present his argument. He sat down and crossed one leg over the other, as if they were just 2 people having a normal conversation over a cup of coffee. "I have already taken my things from the house," he told her. "I am at the Riverside Hotel for now, until I can find another place. My lawyer has marked all the important parts in the documents. You really should sign it while the medicine is still keeping you numb." Eleanor suddenly laughed. The sound was a surprise, even to herself. It was an empty sound, full of shock and dulled by the drugs, and it made her broken ribs ache with pain. "You must be kidding me," she said. "This has to be some kind of terrible joke." But then she looked at his face, and she could see the truth in his cold, blue eyes. He was completely and totally serious. He had worked this all out ahead of time. He had chosen the perfect moment. With the same cold calculation he used as the chief financial officer of his company. He waited until she was completely helpless, full of medication, and far too weak to put up a fight. "Grant," her voice broke, "we have been married for 12 years. "Exactly," he replied. 12 years is more than long enough to realize when something is not working out. He checked his watch again, and that small movement felt like he had slapped her across the face. "I will give you a little time to look it over," he continued. "My lawyer needs the signed papers by Friday. That should give you 3 days. I believe that is more than reasonable." Reasonable? He thought leaving his injured wife and asking for a divorce, while she was unable to even leave her bed, was reasonable? Grant got to his feet. He brushed off some dust that was not there from his perfect pants. He straightened his tie. He gave her one last cold look. Those were the very same eyes that had once stared at her with love. Or at least, what she had believed was love. "I will be in contact," he said. And just like that, he was gone. The door clicked closed behind him, and the sound bounced off the walls like a gunshot in the sterile, silent room. Eleanor just looked at the brown envelope. She found herself looking at the wilting flowers on the table next to her bed. She looked up at the ceiling tiles, which she had counted so many times over the last 72 hours. Not one single tear came out of her eyes. She was in too much of a shock to even begin to cry. Her phone made a buzzing sound on the small table next to her. She slowly moved to pick it up, and a wave of pain shot through her broken body from just that small motion. The screen lit up with a number she did not know. It was the same number that had called her 6 times already that week. She had ignored it each time, thinking it was just a telemarketer. This time, though, the person had left a text message. The words appeared on her screen. "Eleanor, this is very important. I know what your husband is trying to do. I know this because I am the person who..." And just like that, the message was cut off. Eleanor stared at the unfinished sentence. Her heart began to beat very fast in her chest, and the monitor beside her started to beep much more quickly. A nurse hurried to the door of her room. "Mrs. Whitmore, is everything all right? Your heart rate just went up." "I am fine," Eleanor lied, the words just coming out of her mouth. "I just had a bad dream." The nurse did all the usual things, like checking her vital signs, giving her more medicine, and fluffing her pillow for what felt like the 100th time. "Your husband came by a little while ago," the nurse said, in a casual voice. "He did not stay for very long. Is he planning to come back later?" Eleanor's eyes moved down to the divorce papers that were still lying on her blanket. "No, sub," she answered, her voice so weak it was almost a whisper. "I really do not think he is." After the nurse walked out, a heavy silence returned to the hospital room. Eleanor's hands trembled as she reached for the thick envelope on her bedside table. She pulled out a large stack of documents. The pages were covered in complicated legal terms, spelling out the end of the life they had built as a couple. Her gaze fell upon a page marked with a small, arrow-shaped sticky note. In Grant's perfect, neat handwriting, he had written just 2 words, "Sign here." He was handling their divorce like it was just another business contract he needed to close. Eleanor's thoughts drifted back to their wedding day. She could almost hear Grant promising to be with her through sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death finally separated them. It seemed that sickness was the only thing needed to void that promise. An unfamiliar number flashed on her phone screen again. Eleanor just watched it ring, feeling completely numb. It rang 3 times, then 4, then a 5th time before it finally stopped and went to voicemail. Who could possibly be calling her right now? How could they know what Grant was doing to her, and how on earth would anyone know that her marriage was completely falling apart? She had no answers, just a long list of confusing questions. All she had was a pile of divorce papers and a deep, empty feeling in her chest, as if her entire world had been smashed into a million tiny pieces that could never be put back together again. The morphine in her system began to gently pull her into a deep sleep. She tried to fight off the heavy drowsiness. She struggled to make sense of what had just happened, but the medication was simply too powerful. Her very last thought before she finally drifted away was of Grant's face. It was the specific way he had looked at her, or more accurately, the way he had completely avoided making eye contact. It felt as if she was already a ghost that he could not see. It was as if he had already scrubbed every memory of her from his life. It felt as if their years together had meant absolutely nothing to him. When Eleanor finally woke up, the bright morning light stung her eyes. Someone had opened the curtains all the way. Sunlight was pouring into the room, completely unaware that her life had just been shattered. But today, her mind felt a little less foggy. The doctors had lowered her dose of morphine. As the cloudiness in her mind started to clear, the awful reality of her situation came crashing down on her. Grant's words echoed in her head. "This is what is best for both of us. My things are already moved out. You should probably sign these papers while you are still feeling up to it." The absolute coldness in his voice was stunning. He had clearly planned every single detail. He had chosen a moment when she was at her weakest point, too sick to put up a fight and physically unable to even get out of her hospital bed. "Oh, I am going to make him pay for this," a voice suddenly said. Eleanor slowly turned her head and saw Maureen DeLuca standing in the doorway. "Mo," she whispered. Her best friend of 20 years worked as a nurse in this very hospital. The furious look on Mo's face told Eleanor that she already knew everything. Mo marched into the room, her nursing uniform looking wrinkled after a very long shift. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her brown eyes were burning with pure anger. "The entire floor is talking about it," Mo said. "That self-important monster came in here yesterday. He actually served you with divorce papers, while you are lying here with a collapsed lung. You can barely even breathe by yourself. I promise you, Eleanor, I am going to track him down and make him regret this day for the rest of his life." Eleanor's voice was so quiet it was hard to hear. "How did you find out? Honey, this is a hospital. Gossip travels around here faster than any sickness. Everyone knows what is going on within 15 minutes. Mo pulled a chair right next to the bed. She took Eleanor's hand between both of hers. Her hands felt warm and strong, which was the exact comfort Eleanor needed at that moment. "Tell me exactly what happened," Mo said in a softer voice. "I want to hear every single word that he said to you." And so Eleanor told her the whole story. She described the thick envelope, his calm and logical excuses, the way he kept looking at his watch, and the Friday deadline he had given her to sign the papers. With every detail she shared, Mo's face grew more and more angry. "That man is a complete snake," Mo finally said. "And there is something I should have told you many years ago." A sudden chill ran down Eleanor's spine. "Told me what?" Mo paused for a moment. She glanced toward the door, then turned her focus back to Eleanor. Her expression changed, as if she was making a very difficult decision. "Honey, I have been keeping this secret for 3 years now. That man has been cheating on you. It actually started before you had your hysterectomy surgery." The room felt like it was starting to spin. Eleanor grabbed the bed rails, holding on so tightly that her knuckles turned completely white. "Who is she?" "Her name is Vivian Holt," Mo replied. "She is a junior executive at HisCompany. I have seen them out in public together, Eleanor. I even have pictures of them." Mo took out her phone. She swiped through her photo gallery and then held the screen up for Eleanor to see. It was a picture of Grant at a restaurant with another woman. Their heads were tilted close together, and his hand was resting gently on her arm. The woman was younger than Eleanor, with beautiful blonde hair, and she was gorgeous. She was wearing a red dress that likely cost more money than everything in Eleanor's closet combined. The next photo showed Grant's car parked outside of an apartment building, with the same woman walking toward it. And there was another picture after that one, and another, and then another. The photographs went back 3 full years. "Mo!" Eleanor could hardly get the words out. "Why did you not tell me about this?" "Because you were not in a place to hear it," Mo said gently. "Every time I tried to hint at it, you would immediately start defending him. You would tell me that Grant was just working late. You would explain that he was under a lot of stress," Mo continued. "You insisted that your marriage was just in a difficult phase and that you two would eventually work through it." Mo was absolutely right. Eleanor had said all of those things. She said them because she wanted so badly for them to be true. She had ignored every single one of the warning signs. The late nights he claimed to be at the office, the new expensive cologne he started wearing, and the way Grant became distant after her surgery. He had told her he did not want to hurt her while she was still recovering. She believed he was being kind and considerate, but the truth was, he had already checked out of their marriage. He was already with someone new. Her hysterectomy surgery had been 2 years ago. "I know, honey," Eleanor whispered. "He began to pull away from me while I was getting better. I thought it was all my fault. I thought he did not see me as attractive anymore. I thought—" Her voice cracked. The tears finally started to fall, hot and angry and full of shame. Mo just held her as she cried. She did not offer any empty, comforting phrases. She just sat there with her. After the crying finally slowed down, Eleanor's phone buzzed on the table again. It was the same unknown number. Before Eleanor could even move, Mo grabbed the phone from the table. "Who is this?" Mo said sharply into the phone. "She is in the hospital, you monster. Whatever you are trying to sell, she is not interested." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then Mo's entire face changed. Her jaw dropped open. "Wait 1 second, Mo said, her voice slow with disbelief. She handed the phone over to Eleanor. It says this call is from your father." Eleanor took the phone with fingers that felt completely numb. She slowly brought it up to her ear. "Eleanor?" a man's voice asked. It was an older voice, but it sounded familiar in a way that made her stomach twist into a knot. "Eleanor, please do not hang up on me." "Dad?" she whispered. She had not spoken to Raymond Calloway in 15 years. Not since the day of her mother's funeral. Not since the day she found out he had been secretly wealthy while her mother was dying from cancer, and while they were barely scraping by to pay for her medical care. She remembered that awful day like it was yesterday. Her mother had suffered a slow and painful death because they could not afford to get her the best treatment available. Eleanor had called him a coward, a liar, and a monster. She had promised him that she would never speak to him again as long as she lived. And now, after all this time, he was calling her. Calling from a private number while she was lying broken and defeated in a hospital bed. "What do you want?" Her voice was as cold as ice. "I know what your husband is up to," Raymond said. "I know because I have been keeping an eye on him for some time. I have already taken action, Eleanor. I have taken action to protect you." "I do not need you to protect me," she snapped. "I do not need anything at all from you." Please, just hear me out. For the past 2 years, your husband has been moving your money. He has been transferring your shared money into secret bank accounts in other countries. He is planning to leave you with absolutely nothing. In fact, it is worse than nothing. He is planning to leave you with all of his massive debt. Eleanor's heart started to hammer in her chest. The monitor next to her bed began to beep faster and faster. Mo looked over at her, her eyes wide with shock. "How could you possibly know all of that?" Eleanor asked. "Because 6 months ago," he replied, "I bought his company." The words did not register at first. It just did not seem real. "What? Whitmore Technologies? You own Grant's company?" "I now own the majority of the stock through a different company." "Grant has no clue," he continued. "Nobody knows. But I know about every single thing he has done, Eleanor. I know about every dollar he has taken from you, and every lie he has ever told. And I can help you get all of it back. But you have to allow me to help." Eleanor's hand was shaking so badly that the phone almost fell from her hand. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you doing this after all this time? You have not called me in 15 years. You let Mom die. You let her suffer when you had more than enough money to save her. Why would you all of a sudden care about what happens to me now?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then he spoke in a very quiet voice. "I have cancer, Eleanor. It is pancreatic, stage 4. The doctors told me I have about 1 year left, and I could not stand the thought of dying while you still hated me." The phone slipped from Eleanor's numb fingers, landing with a soft thud on the hospital blanket. From the tiny speaker, she could just make out Raymond's voice. "Eleanor? Are you still there?" Mo reached over and took the phone. After saying a few words Eleanor could not quite register, she ended the call. "What in the world was that about?" Mo asked gently. Eleanor just stared at the ceiling, at the same white tiles she had counted over and over again the night before. Her husband was having an affair and demanded a divorce. Her estranged father was on his deathbed and wanted forgiveness, and she was stuck here, in this hospital bed, completely unable to escape any of it. "I do not know," she whispered. "I do not really know anything anymore." The next morning, a man she had never seen before walked into her room. He wore an expensive gray suit and carried a leather briefcase. He introduced himself as Dennis Oakley, an attorney. "I am here on behalf of your father," Dennis said. He placed his briefcase on the same chair where Mo had sat just a day ago. He sent me to deliver some documents and to provide you with some clarity. Eleanor's first instinct was to tell him to leave, to scream until her voice was hoarse. But something held her back. Maybe it was his calm, professional manner, or perhaps it was just the deep, aching exhaustion that had settled into her very soul. Or maybe she was simply desperate to understand what was happening. "Go on," she said, her voice quiet. Dennis clicked the latches on his briefcase and removed a thick folder of documents. 6 months ago, your father purchased a controlling interest in Whitmore Technologies, which is your husband's company. He used a shell corporation named Callaway Holdings. The entire purchase was completely legal and was executed in absolute secrecy. But why? Eleanor asked, confused. Why would he buy Grant's company? Because 3 years ago, your father hired private investigators to watch over you from a distance. He needed to know that you were okay. And that you were happy, Dennis added, letting the words sink in. He gave Eleanor a brief look of sympathy. It did not take him long to realize that you were neither of those things. 3 years, that was the exact amount of time Grant had been cheating on her. It was the same amount of time Eleanor had spent pretending her marriage was perfectly normal. The investigators found proof of your husband's affair, Dennis went on. They also uncovered evidence of serious financial crimes. Your husband has been stealing money from his own company. It started small, but the amounts kept getting bigger. He has been moving the money into offshore accounts. He set up those accounts using your name, and he did it without your knowledge, Dennis finished. A cold wave of nausea washed over Eleanor. My name? If this theft is discovered, you would be the one held responsible. You could face a criminal trial. Your husband has been carefully planning for you to take the fall for his crimes. The room felt like it was spinning. Eleanor grabbed the cold metal bed rails to keep herself steady. That is impossible, she said. Grant would never... He could not do that. But the moment she said it, she knew it was a lie. Grant could. Grant would. He had already shown his true nature when he had divorce papers delivered to her hospital bed. That was just his latest act of cruelty. Eleanor's mind flashed back to her wedding day. She remembered the vows Grant had spoken and all the promises he had made. She remembered how he looked at her as if she was the only person in the world. She thought of their honeymoon in Italy, walking together through the historic streets of Florence. Grant had excitedly pointed out all the beautiful architecture, explaining its history like a little boy on an adventure. In those 2 weeks, she had fallen in love with him all over again. She recalled coming home from the hospital after her hysterectomy. Grant had filled her bedroom with flowers. The little card had read, "We do not need children, we just need each other." She had cried tears of joy, but now every single one of those memories felt tainted. Now she saw them through a horrifying new lens. Grant sent flowers because he felt guilty. Grant said they did not need children because he was already planning his way out. Grant's happiness on their honeymoon now felt like a carefully crafted performance. It had all been an elaborate act, a show he had kept up for 12 years to hide the monster he truly was. The lawyer's voice, Dennis's voice, pulled Eleanor from her spiraling thoughts. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you all right?" "No," she answered, her own voice trembling. "I am not all right. My husband cheated on me for 3 years. He stole our future and tried to frame me for it. He served me divorce papers when I could not even get out of bed. And now you are telling me my father has been spying on me this whole time? Like some kind of creepy guardian angel?" Dennis cleared his throat. He would probably call himself a concerned father. Eleanor's next words were laced with acid. "He let my mother die. He was a wealthy man," she continued. "He could have afforded the best doctors and the newest medicines, but he did nothing. He hid his fortune and just stood by while she wasted away. Dennis paused for a moment, then said something that made her blood turn to ice. "Your mother asked him not to." Eleanor froze in her hospital bed. "What did you just say?" "Your mother knew about the money," Dennis explained gently. "She had known for a very long time. She made your father promise that he would not spend it on her medical bills. She wanted him to save it for you, to secure your future." "That is a complete lie," Eleanor whispered. "It is the absolute truth. I was in the room when she made him give her his word. I have been your father's lawyer for 30 years. I saw how much keeping that promise destroyed him." "And then," Dennis said softly, "I watched him get destroyed all over again when you shut him out of your life." Eleanor felt as if she could not get enough air. Beside her, the heart monitor began to beep faster and faster. A nurse poked her head into the room. "Is everything okay in here?" she asked, looking at the frantic rhythm on the screen. Your heart rate suddenly went up. "Fine," Eleanor choked out. "We are fine." The nurse looked unconvinced, but she eventually left. Dennis looked at Eleanor with calm, kind eyes. "I am not here to change your mind about your father," he said. "I am only here to tell you the truth, and to present you with a choice. You can sign those divorce papers from your husband. You can walk away with whatever small amount he decides to give you. Or," he continued, "you can stand up and fight back, with all of your father's money and power behind you." "I do not want his money," she snapped. "I do not want anything from him." "Then what is it that you want?" The question lingered in the quiet hospital room. Eleanor did not have an answer. She had wanted a happy life and a loving marriage. She had wanted to grow old with Grant. For years, she had dreamed of having a family, right up until the day the doctors told her it was impossible. But none of it was real. It had never been real. It was all a story built on a foundation of Grant's lies. Dennis rose from his chair. He set a small flash drive on the table next to her bed. "This has everything on it," he said. "It has bank records, private emails, and confirmations for wire transfers. It is proof of every single penny your husband stole. It lists every hidden account under his control. It details every single lie he has ever told his board of directors." Dennis then placed a business card next to the flash drive. "Call me when you know what you want to do. Your father is ready and waiting to help you, but only if you ask him. The decision is completely up to you." He then turned and left the room, the door closing with a soft click. Eleanor just stared at the little flash drive. It was amazing that such a small object could hold so much power. She picked up her phone and started scrolling back through 3 years of photographs. She was searching for the truth that she had refused to acknowledge for so long, and it was everywhere. At a company Christmas party, Grant was in the background, turned slightly away from her. A blonde woman, Vivian Holt, stood just a little too close to him. There was a photo from a trip to Napa Valley. Grant was looking down at his phone, while Eleanor smiled for the camera, holding up a glass of wine. His face was blank, his attention a million miles away. Then she found their anniversary picture from last year. Grant's smile never reached his eyes, but Eleanor was glowing, totally unaware of the secret he was hiding. She kept scrolling, and the evidence was everywhere. Hiding in plain sight. She had simply chosen not to see it. That night, in the silence of her hospital room, Eleanor made up her mind. She would not be signing Grant's papers. She would not be taking his scraps. And she was definitely not going to let him get away with this. For the first time in 3 miserable days, she felt something besides pain and confusion. She felt a hot surge of anger. 3 days ahead of schedule, Eleanor checked herself out of the hospital. She ignored her doctor's advice, her friend Mo's protests, and the part of her that desperately wanted to rest. But she could not heal in that room, not while just staring at the ceiling. She refused to just wait by the phone for another threatening call from Grant's lawyers. It was time to take action. She needed to seize back control of her life, and that started with her own body. Mo carefully helped her into a wheelchair. then maneuvered her into an old Honda Civic. With every single bump in the road, a jolt of pain shot through Eleanor's broken ribs. She clenched her jaw and endured it. "So, where are we going?" Mo asked, guiding the car out of the garage. Eleanor gave her the address of a cafe in the city's center. Mo's eyebrows flew up in surprise. "That's Vivian Holt's favorite place. She's there every morning without fail. How could you possibly know that?" "Dennis was the one who told me," Eleanor explained. "My father has had his people watching her too." Mo's voice was full of worry. "Eleanor, are you absolutely sure this is a wise move? Are you really going to confront the other woman?" "I am not going there to start a fight," Eleanor stated with a calm resolve. "I am going there to get an ally." The coffee shop was a trendy, expensive place that sold items like $8 lattes and fancy organic muffins. Eleanor chose a table in the corner and placed her walker beside it. Mo stayed in the car, ready to intervene if the situation turned sour. At precisely 8:15 in the morning, Vivian Holt walked in. She was a beautiful blonde woman, about 4 years younger than Eleanor. Vivian entered the coffee shop with a self-assuredness that made people look up. She was dressed perfectly, a woman who appeared to have her entire world in flawless order. That illusion shattered the moment she spotted Eleanor sitting in the corner. All the color instantly vanished from Vivian's face. Eleanor gave her a small, deliberate wave. For a moment, Vivian stood frozen by the entrance, and Eleanor was sure she was about to run, but instead a look of determination settled on her face. She inhaled slowly, walked straight to Eleanor's table, and took a seat. "I had a feeling you would show up one day," Vivian said. "Oh, so you were expecting me?" Eleanor inquired. "I was expecting something like this," Vivian admitted. "The wife of my boss finding me at my usual spot always seemed like a definite possibility." Eleanor observed the woman sitting across from her. She was searching for any sign of triumph or arrogance, the smug look of a mistress who had gotten what she wanted, but she saw nothing of the sort. Instead, she saw profound weariness, fear, and something that looked a lot like relief. "You are nothing like what I pictured," Eleanor said honestly. Vivian's eyes dropped to Eleanor's walker and the cautious way she carried herself. "You are not what I pictured either. I heard about your accident and the divorce. It is the only thing anyone at work is talking about." "Does the entire office also know about your affair with my husband?" Eleanor asked directly. Vivian flinched as though she had been slapped. "Some of them probably suspect it," she confessed in a low voice. "Grant was never very careful." "No," Eleanor concurred, a sour feeling rising in her throat. "He definitely was not." A heavy silence settled between them, punctuated only by the barista shouting a name and the hiss of the milk steamer. "I did not know he was married," Vivian said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Not at the beginning. He told me he was divorced. By the time I learned the truth, I was in too deep." Eleanor felt her whole world tilt. She had come here ready to hate this woman, to fight a villain, but the person in front of her was just another one of Grant's victims. "You tried to break up with him," Eleanor said. It was a statement, not a question. Vivian nodded. 3 times. Vivian's hands shook as she held her coffee cup. "And each time he made threats. He threatened to destroy my job, my reputation, my whole future. He told me he would completely ruin me if I said a word to anyone about us." Eleanor leaned in, her own pain momentarily forgotten. This was the reason she was here. "What else did he threaten you with?" Vivian's eyes darted around the cafe, checking to see if anyone was listening. She moved closer. "Grant was using me to move money," she whispered. "He set up bank accounts in my name that I knew nothing about. He authorized transfers I never approved. If anyone ever investigates the embezzlement, my name will be all over every single file. I could end up in prison, Eleanor, for horrible things that I never did." All the pieces started clicking into place for Eleanor. Grant was not just a cheater. He was manipulating Vivian the exact same way he had manipulated her. They were both just pawns in his corrupt scheme. set up to take the fall when his empire of lies came crashing down. "Do you have proof of any of this?" Eleanor asked. "I have proof of everything," Vivian replied. "Bank statements, emails, and I even have recordings of him. I have been saving it for months, just trying to find a way out of this before he takes me down with him." "Why haven't you gone to the authorities?" "Because Grant threatened my life," Vivian said, her voice becoming a faint whisper. "He told me that if I ever talked to anyone, he would make sure I took 100% of the blame. He boasted about his powerful connections, his expensive lawyers, and people who could make me vanish. And I actually believed him." Eleanor thought of the small flash drive inside her purse. It held all the evidence her father had found, enough information to save them both and bury Grant forever. "What if I told you there was another way to get out of this mess?" Eleanor offered. "A way we can expose Grant where neither of us gets into any trouble." A tiny flicker of hope appeared in Vivian's eyes. "How?" "My father is the owner of Grant's company." "Grant has no idea," Eleanor went on. "Almost no one does. But my father is able to see everything that goes on. He has access to every single file, every transaction, and every lie that Grant has ever told." The statement hung in the air between them. Vivian looked at Eleanor as if she were speaking another language. "Your father is the owner of Whitmore Technologies? That is impossible. The parent company is a massive European firm called Callaway Holdings." "Callaway," Eleanor said, a slight smile on her face, "is my maiden name." Vivian's jaw dropped. She sank back into her seat, her untouched coffee now completely forgotten. "Why are you sharing this with me?" Vivian finally asked. "Because I need your evidence," Eleanor said simply. "I need the proof you've collected to combine with what my father already has. And in exchange for your cooperation—" "What is in it for me?" Vivian pushed. "In exchange, I will guarantee that the investigation completely clears you. Every document he forced you to sign will be proven to be a forgery. Every illegal account will be tied directly to him. You will walk out of this situation completely clear." "That sounds way too good to be true," Vivian said with a suspicious tone. "It might be," Eleanor admitted, "but it is the only real option you have." Vivian opened her purse and pulled out a small flash drive. It was a perfect match for the one Eleanor's father had given to her. "I have carried this with me every day for the last 6 months," Vivian said. "I was just hoping for the right moment, for someone who actually had the power to use it and make him stop." She slid the drive across the table. "I am not giving this to you for your sake," Vivian said, her eyes locked on Eleanor's. "I am doing this because I will not go to jail for him." Eleanor picked up the drive. It felt heavy, filled with deceit, evidence of Grant's cruelty, and the key to her own freedom. "Thank you," Eleanor said softly. "You should not thank me yet," Vivian replied. "When Grant feels trapped, he becomes extremely dangerous. So you need to be very careful with whatever you have planned." Eleanor put the flash drive in her pocket and reached for her walker. She stopped and said, "I have one last question for you. Did you ever truly love him, Vivian? Was any of it real?" Vivian was quiet for several seconds before she slowly shook her head. "In the beginning, I thought I did. But you cannot love someone who is not a real person. Grant was just playing a role. The real Grant is just whoever he needs to be to get his way. I was a means to an end for him, and that is it. And once I was no longer a means to an end, so it was at the dollar shop. Then by tower he would have discarded me, just like he is trying to discard you now." Vivian stood up. "I know it might not mean much, but I am sorry for all of it. I am sorry for my role, even when I was in the dark, and for not coming to you sooner." "You are here talking to me now," Eleanor said. "That is what matters." Vivian gave a short, firm nod. Then she turned and left the coffee shop, disappearing back into her life. She left Eleanor alone at the table with 2 flash drives and the enormous weight of the secrets they held. Raymond Calloway's estate was a 50-acre property of rolling green hills just outside the city. It was a place Eleanor had never seen. In 15 years of being estranged from him, she had never even known her father's address. The house was immense, a modern work of art made of stone and glass that looked like it belonged in a magazine. But the land itself felt peaceful, with lovely gardens, a private lake, and a field of apple trees. Raymond greeted her at the huge front door. He looked far more ill than she had braced herself for. The cancer was clearly winning the fight. His fine suit hung from his thin body as if it were on a clothes hanger. His face was hollow, and his eyes were full of weariness. But they were her eyes, the same hazel green she saw looking back at her from the mirror every single morning. "I appreciate you making such a long trip," he said. "And I appreciate you finally being honest with me," she shot back. He guided her through the enormous house and into a study where books climbed the walls from floor to ceiling. A fire crackled in the hearth, a strange sight on a warm spring day. Eleanor sank into a deep leather armchair, her muscles aching from the hours spent in the car. "Dennis mentioned your meeting with Vivian went well," Raymond began. "That depends on your definition of well." She handed over her evidence. "She's on our side." "Good," he nodded. "That is very good news." Eleanor examined her father's face, searching for the cold-hearted monster she had held in her mind for 15 years. The man who had let her mother waste away. But the man before her was just a fragile, old man, a man at the end of his life. And he was looking at her with an expression that looked a lot like hope. "I need you to tell me everything," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "About Mom, the whole story. Dennis told me she knew about the money. He said she made you promise not to use it for her medical care. Is that the truth?" Raymond stared into the dancing flames, silent for a very long time. "Yes," he said at last. "That is the truth." "But why? Why would she ever do something like that?" "Because she knew how I got that money," he said, turning to her with glistening eyes. "I was not always a good person, Eleanor. When I was young, I did things I am deeply ashamed of. I made business decisions that ruined people. I completely destroyed my rivals. I betrayed my partners. Your mother was aware of it all. She supported me through everything. But she would not allow a single cent of that money to be used to keep her alive. She called it blood money. She said she would rather die than be saved by it. And you just let her? You just stood by and watched her die? What other choice did I have?" Raymond's voice trembled. "She was my wife. She made me swear on our life together. She made me promise to respect her choice. So I honored that promise, even though it broke me into a million pieces. Even though I have lived with that regret every single day since she passed." Eleanor felt her eyes begin to burn with tears. But she refused to let them fall. "If you decide to hate me, you have every right," Raymond went on. "I hate myself. I have for the last 15 years. But your mother asked me to do one other thing. She wanted me to watch over you, to protect you from afar. She said I should only interfere if you were ever in real trouble." He opened a desk drawer and removed a stack of old envelopes. They were yellowed with time, bound together by a faded ribbon. "These are her letters," Raymond said. "She wrote them for you over the years. She wrote a new one every time something important happened in your life. The day you finished college, the day you got married, the day you landed that big promotion at work. She kept writing to you, even when she knew she would never be there to see any of it." Eleanor's hands shook as she took the bundle of letters from him. "She told me to keep them for you until the moment was right," Raymond said. "I have waited for 15 years, wondering if this day would ever arrive." Eleanor carefully untied the ribbon. The first letter was dated just 3 months before her mother passed away. The handwriting was weak, but it was hers. "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, no, it means I am no longer with you, And I am so very sorry for that, my sweet girl. I am sorry I had to go. I am sorry for the secrets we were forced to keep. I'm sorry for all the things I could not tell you when I was alive. Your father loves you more than you could ever imagine, and certainly more than he ever knew how to express. He has made terrible mistakes, but so have I. We all do. Please do not let your anger destroy your life, Eleanor. Do not let bitterness poison the beautiful years you have in front of you. Your father needs you. And whether you realize it now or not, you need him too. I love you. I have always loved you. And I will always love you. Be brave, my darling. Be kind. And above all, be happy. Forever yours, Mom. Eleanor's world blurred as tears finally escaped and streamed down her face. 15 years of rage, 15 years of silence, and all that time her mother had been praying they would find their way back to one another. She wanted us to reconnect, Raymond said softly. She always believed that we would when the time was right. Eleanor read one letter after another. It was like her mother's voice was reaching out from the past, her words filled with wisdom, love, and forgiveness. When she finally looked up, hours had gone by. The fire had died down to a bed of glowing embers. Raymond had sat there in silence the entire time, giving her the quiet she needed. I'm not sure I can forgive you, Eleanor finally said. Not for all of it. Not yet. I am not asking for your forgiveness. Then what are you asking for? Time, he answered. Whatever time I have left. I do not want to die as a stranger to my own daughter. Eleanor looked at the dying man across from her. This was the man she had despised for 15 years. The same man who had been secretly watching over her the whole time. I do not want that either, she whispered. She did not hug him. It was too soon for that. But she did reach across the small table between them and take his hand. His hand felt thin and weak inside of hers. It was the hand of a man who knew his time was running out. So, what is your plan for Grant? Raymond asked. I want justice, Eleanor said, her voice firm with purpose. For myself, for you, for Vivian, for every last person he has ever hurt. And if he refuses to give you justice, then we will take it, she said. A faint smile appeared on Raymond's lips, but his eyes shone with pride. Your mother would be incredibly proud of you, he said. I hope so, Eleanor replied, squeezing his hand. I really hope so. 2 weeks later, Eleanor was sitting across from Grant at a dinner table. He had chosen the restaurant. He had chosen the time. He honestly believed he was the one in charge. He could not have been more wrong. Eleanor had made sure to arrive early. She had selected her outfit with great care. She chose a dark blue dress that made her feel powerful, and she wore her mother's pearl earrings. She was even wearing heels, which sent sharp pains through her still, healing pelvis. Each item felt like a piece of armor she was putting on for the fight to come. She was finally walking without a walker. It was a slow and difficult process, but she was standing on her own, and that was everything. Grant arrived at 7 o'clock sharp. He wore his charming smile like a costume. He leaned in to kiss her cheek as if they were just dear friends catching up. He ordered a very pricey bottle of wine without bothering to ask her preference. That was a classic move of his. You look amazing, Grant said. So much better than the last time I saw you in the hospital. Thank you, she said. I am feeling much stronger. I am so glad you agreed to meet, he continued. I am certain we can handle this like two reasonable people. There is no need to get lawyers involved and make a mess. We can just have a simple, clean split. Eleanor took a delicate sip of her wine. It was an excellent vintage. Grant had always had impeccable taste in wine. His moral code was shattered, but his taste in wine was perfect. I had my lawyer prepare a new settlement agreement, Grant said. It is far more generous than my first offer. I am sure you will agree that it is more than fair. How generous is it exactly? You can have the house, the car, and plenty of money to pay for all your medical bills. It is a very good offer, Eleanor. He was trying to toss her a few crumbs from the massive feast he had been secretly preparing for years. He had no idea that she knew about the secret bank accounts, the hidden properties, or the money he had stolen, and he seemed to think she should be grateful for his so-called generosity. "I have been thinking a lot about our marriage," Eleanor said, her voice perfectly level. "All 12 years. I was just wondering when you changed. Was it a gradual thing, or did it happen suddenly? I'm just curious." Grant's smile wavered for a fraction of a second. This was clearly not the conversation he had been expecting. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the exact moment you decided that I was no longer enough for you. When did you start planning to leave? When did you start your affair with Vivian?" For a brief moment, the color vanished from his face, but he quickly recovered his confident act. "Eleanor, I do not know what you think you have heard, but I have heard everything, Grant. And I have seen everything, too. I have seen the photos of you and Vivian. I have seen the statements from the bank accounts you thought I did not know about. I have seen the emails you sent your lawyer, the ones where you laid out your plan to leave me with absolutely nothing. That is not true. I have also been having some very productive conversations with my father. You remember my father, Raymond, don't you? You met him at our wedding. He has recently developed a keen interest in your business career. He is particularly fascinated by your work at Whitmore Technologies." Grant set his wine glass down on the table, and she saw that his hand was trembling. "Your father? The two of you have not spoken for years. We are getting reacquainted. He has been incredibly supportive. As a matter of fact, he has shared some very interesting information." Eleanor leaned forward, savoring the look of panic on his face. "Did you know he has been tracking your offshore accounts? Every single wire transfer, every fake invoice, and every last dollar you have stolen from your own company." All the color vanished from Grant's face, leaving it a sickly shade of white. For the first time she could remember, he looked truly afraid. He stammered, his voice choked with panic. "Eleanor, whatever you think you know. I know you have been secretly funneling money out of the company for 3 years. I know you used my name to open fraudulent accounts. And I know you were going to leave me to face the fallout while you ran away with your mistress and all that cash. That is ridiculous. You cannot possibly prove any of that." "Actually, I can. Your girlfriend, Vivian, was surprisingly helpful. She gave me a mountain of evidence, and every single piece of it tells the same story." As my father's investigators laid out the truth, Grant's jaw tightened, and his mask of charm shattered into a million pieces. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice harsh. "I want a divorce that is fair. I want a complete list of all our marital assets, and I want my half. That includes the money you tried so hard to hide." "And if I say no?" Eleanor offered him a smile that was completely empty of warmth. "Then my father will give his evidence to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You will probably serve the next 10 to 15 years in a federal prison. The choice is yours, Grant." She rose from her chair. Every movement sent a shock wave of pain through her healing body. But she refused to let him see her weakness. She grabbed her purse from the table and left a $20 bill for her glass of wine. "I will be in touch," she told him. "Oh, and Grant, your deadline is this Friday. I think that is more than enough time for you to decide." She walked straight out of the restaurant and did not look back once. Behind her, she could hear Grant shouting her name. His voice went from demanding to threatening, and finally to begging her to come back. She just kept walking. Mo was waiting for her in the parking lot. She took one look at Eleanor's face and smiled. "So, how did it go?" "I think I made him very nervous." "Good. He deserves to be nervous. He deserves much worse than that." Eleanor carefully lowered herself into the passenger seat. After the adrenaline from her brave performance wore off, her hands began to tremble. "I cannot believe I did that," she whispered. "I just threatened my husband with federal prison." "Your soon-to-be ex-husband," Mo gently corrected her. "He is on his way out, remember?" "Yes, my soon-to-be ex-husband." A laugh escaped Eleanor's lips, surprising even herself. It felt amazing. Mo put the car in gear. "Where to now?" "We are going to my father's house. There is still a lot of work to do." But Grant was not the kind of person to go down without a fight. 3 days after their meeting, a certified letter arrived from his lawyers. It was not an offer to settle, it was a counterattack. Grant was making a shocking new claim. He was now claiming she was his partner in the embezzlement scheme. He said setting up the secret overseas accounts was her idea. He claimed she had been manipulating him from the start and was now trying to frame him to save herself. Worse still, he was suing her for the house, all their shared assets, and for the emotional pain his web of lies had supposedly caused her. Eleanor read the entire letter 3 separate times. With each word, a new wave of cold dread washed over her. "He is coming after me with everything he has," she told Dennis. "He is actually trying to paint me as the villain in all of this." "That was always his emergency plan," Dennis said. "If he could not get away clean, his next move was to pull you down into the mud with him. The only real question is whether anyone will believe his story." "Will they?" Dennis just shook his head. "Not with the evidence we have. But he does not know that yet. He thinks you are bluffing. He is certain your father's involvement is nothing more than an empty threat. So, what is our next step?" "We are going to call his bluff." The following week was a chaotic whirlwind of legal strategy sessions and careful planning. Dennis put together a dedicated team of attorneys, financial experts, and private investigators. They all worked around the clock to build a completely solid case against Grant. Grant, however, had his own connections. He had influential friends and allies in powerful positions. He immediately started a campaign to ruin Eleanor's reputation. He told everyone they knew that she was emotionally unstable. He claimed the accident had caused brain damage and that she was inventing wild fantasies because she could not handle the divorce. Some of their acquaintances actually began to believe him. Eleanor saw people looking at her strangely at the market. Friends she had known for decades were suddenly not answering her calls. Someone even left a cruel note on her car that said, "Gold digger." But the most painful blow came when Grant convinced his own sister, Charlotte Whitmore, to turn on her. She called Eleanor one night screaming. "How could you do this to him?" Charlotte shrieked into the phone. "He gave you everything. He loved you. And this is how you treat him?" "Charlotte," Eleanor started, trying her best to keep her voice steady. "Your brother has been cheating on me for the past 3 years. He has been stealing from his company. He had divorce papers delivered to me while I was in a hospital bed." "Lies! That is all lies. Grant warned me you would make things up. He told me you planned this whole thing, that you tricked him into marrying you, and that you have been deceiving everyone all along." The phone went silent. Eleanor sat alone in the dark for hours that night. She began to doubt if she was doing the right thing. She wondered if the truth had any power when people found it so much easier to believe a lie. Mo found her at 2 in the morning. She was sitting fully dressed in the bathtub, with the cold water pouring down on her. "Oh, my dear friend." Mo gently guided her out of the tub. She wrapped her in a pile of warm towels and had her drink a cup of hot tea. "What happened?" "Everyone believes him," Eleanor whispered, her teeth chattering. "Everyone is convinced I am the crazy one, the liar, the gold digger." "Not everyone," Mo replied in a soft voice. "But enough of them do. Enough that I am starting to wonder if I am wrong." Mo sat on the floor beside her and held her hand. "This is what men like him do," Mo said gently. "They use their charm to get away with horrible things for years. They make the world believe they are the victim, and the person they hurt is the one to blame. This is not about you, Eleanor. This is about how good he is at deception." "What if I lose?" "Then you lose fighting," Mo said, her voice filled with conviction. "But you are not going to let him win by simply giving up." Eleanor looked at her closest friend. the one person who had stood by her through it all. Mo was the one who had seen the truth when no one else would. "I am so scared," Eleanor confessed. "I have never felt this afraid in my entire life." "Good. Being afraid means you know what is at stake. But you are not alone in this. You have me, you have your father, and you have the truth. And the truth does matter, Eleanor. It matters, even when it feels like it does not." The next morning, Eleanor woke with a new sense of purpose. She was finished defending herself. She was through waiting for Grant's next move. It was time for her to go on the attack. 3 weeks later, Grant Whitmore strode into the quarterly Board of Directors meeting. Within the headquarters of Whitmore Technologies, he felt completely safe. His financial projections were excellent, and his presentation was perfect. The company's new majority shareholder was attending for the first time, and Grant was ready to make an outstanding impression. He had spent the last month managing the situation. Eleanor's threats had worried him at first, but his legal team promised him she had no real proof. The offshore accounts were buried too deep. The evidence, they insisted, did not exist. His smear campaign was a complete success. Eleanor was just bluffing. She had to be. The boardroom began to fill with the usual executives. There were board members Grant had worked with for years, the chief financial officer of the parent company, and the corporate lawyers. But then, two people he had never seen before entered the room. The first was a man in an expensive, perfectly tailored suit. His name badge read Dennis Oakley, General Counsel for Callaway Holdings. The second person was a woman. She was in a simple navy dress with a strand of pearls. She walked with a slow, deliberate gait, like someone still recovering from a serious injury. Grant felt his blood run cold. "Eleanor, Grant whispered, his own voice sounding weak and unfamiliar. "Eleanor, what in the world are you doing here?" Eleanor did not say a word. She walked directly to the head of the massive conference table. That chair was reserved for the majority shareholder. She took a seat. Dennis stood at her side and opened his briefcase. "The schedule for this meeting has changed," Dennis informed everyone present. "Instead of talking about quarterly profits, we are going to look into some financial problems that have just been discovered. Specifically, we will address a pattern of embezzlement that has been going on for the last 3 years. Grant opened his mouth to object, but nothing came out. "We have bank statements," Dennis went on, "along with verified wire transfers. We also have fake invoices and internal company messages. All of them point to the intentional theft of company money." He slid a document across the polished table. It was a form authorizing a transfer to a secret offshore account, with Grant's signature clearly visible on the bottom line. "We also have a sworn testimony from Vivian Holt," Dennis added. "She is a junior executive who was tricked into helping launder the stolen funds. She has given us signed statements explaining her part and how Mr. Whitmore manipulated her." Another paper, another signature, another piece of the trap closed tightly around Grant. "And finally, we have been helping federal agents. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has been quietly creating its own case over the past 6 weeks. This meeting today is to decide if this company will fully cooperate with their current investigation." Grant finally found his voice. "This is ridiculous. These documents are fake. This is just a hostile takeover that you are disguising as a criminal investigation." "The documents are all 100% real," Eleanor said, her voice strong and unwavering. "Every word, every signature, and every single dollar. I have financial experts who can confirm every transaction. I have digital forensic specialists who can trace every single transfer." She then rose to her feet and moved slowly toward the chair where Grant sat. She stared down at him, her eyes empty of pity or fear, reflecting only the cold, hard truth. "And I have 12 years of marriage that showed me exactly what kind of man you are." The board will now vote on the immediate suspension of Mr. Whitmore from all of his duties, Dennis announced. All in favor? Every single hand in the boardroom shot up. Every director Grant had charmed and fooled for years. Every person he believed was on his side. The board will now vote on giving full cooperation to federal investigators. All in favor? Once again, every hand went up. The board will now vote to terminate Mr. Whitmore's employment. For cause? Effective immediately. All in favor? The vote was unanimous. Grant slammed both of his hands down on the table. You cannot do this to me. I am the one who built this company. I made each and every one of you millions of dollars. You owe me. We owe you nothing, one of the directors said. It was a woman Grant had consistently overlooked, assuming she was just filling a seat. You stole from your own company. You lied to this board. You faked documents, and you manipulated your own employees. You are lucky that we are only firing you and not pressing charges ourselves. We will let the professionals handle the criminal charges, Eleanor said calmly. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has been extremely into your rather imaginative bookkeeping. Just then, 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Grant looked around the room in a panic, searching for a friendly face or anyone who might speak up for him. But there was no one. They walked him out of the building. He carried a small cardboard box that held the last pieces of his old life. A nameplate, his framed degrees, and a wedding photo he left behind in the parking garage. From the boardroom window, Eleanor watched it all happen. Mo came and stood beside her. How does this feel? Mo asked quietly. I'm not sure, Eleanor said, being completely honest. I thought I would feel satisfied. I do not feel like I have won anything, Eleanor confessed, her voice barely a whisper. I just feel tired. That makes perfect sense, Mo said, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. You have been fighting a war. You have every right to be completely exhausted. Eleanor stared as Grant's car pulled out of the parking lot. She watched him drive away from the life he had destroyed with his own greed. It was over, or at least, it was almost over. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. After his lawyers made a deal, Grant pleaded guilty to less serious charges. He was sentenced to 18 months in a low-security prison, given a fine he could not afford. And his career in finance was finished for good. Eleanor did not go to his sentencing. She had no wish to see him in handcuffs. She did not need the kind of closure that would come from watching him suffer. What she needed was peace, and she knew that peace could not be found inside a courtroom. The settlement gave her half of their shared marital assets, which included the house, her car, and enough money to start a new life. The stolen funds were located and given back to the company. Vivian Holt's name was completely cleared. She moved to Seattle after it was all finished and started a new job in a different industry. 2 months after the court case ended, Charlotte Whitmore left her a tearful voicemail. She was apologizing for everything she had ever said and was begging Eleanor for her forgiveness. Eleanor called her back, and they decided to meet for coffee. It was awkward and tense at first, but Charlotte was genuinely sorry. She had no idea about the truth of her brother. She had believed his lies, just like everyone else had. The 2 women formed an unlikely friendship. But it is often the case that the people who understand you best are the ones who have been hurt by the same person. During this time, Raymond's cancer got worse, but the connection between the father and daughter became stronger. Eleanor made it a point to visit him every Sunday. They would sit together in his library, reading letters from her mother. They talked about the past and the future, and every moment in between. I have been thinking about what I want to do with my life now, Eleanor told him during one of their Sunday visits. And what have you decided? He asked. I am going back to my old job. Actually, they have already offered me a promotion. Raymond raised an eyebrow. You are not interested in taking over my empire? Eleanor laughed. Not at all. I am not a powerful executive. I am a marketing director who is good at her job and likes the people she works with. And who wants to leave the office at 5 o'clock so she can walk her dog?" "You have a dog?" he asked. "I am getting one. He is a rescue. I have already chosen him at the shelter. His name is going to be Biscuit." Raymond smiled, a real smile that made his tired eyes shine. "Your mother would have loved that. She always wanted you to have a dog." "I know," she said softly. She mentioned it in one of her letters. They sat together in a comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that feels natural and comes from a deep connection. "I am so proud of you," Raymond said, "not because of Grant or because of all this trouble. I am proud of the woman you have become." Eleanor felt tears welling in her eyes and quickly blinked them back. "I'm trying," she said. "Every day, I am trying to figure out who I am when I am not someone's wife, someone's disappointment, or someone's victim." "You were never really any of those things," he told her gently. "You have always been Eleanor. You just forgot that for a little while." She reached over and took his hand. His grip was not as firm as it had been 3 months earlier. The cancer was weakening him, but his eyes were peaceful. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For watching over me, for being patient with me, and for giving me the tools to save myself." "You saved yourself, Eleanor. I only provided you with some resources." "Still, thank you," she insisted. He squeezed her hand softly. "Thank you for giving an old man a second chance." Raymond Calloway passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 months after that conversation. Eleanor was holding his hand when it happened. She had moved into his big house for his final weeks, using the guest room and spending every possible moment by his side. They had talked for many hours during those last days about her mother, about their past, and about the future that Raymond would not live to see. They talked about the mistakes they had both made in their lives, and they also talked about the forgiveness they had both managed to find. "I do not feel scared," Raymond told her, just 2 days before he passed away. "I have made my peace with your mother, with you, and with everything I have done." "I'm glad to hear that," she replied. "Make me a promise." "Anything at all." "Do not live your life, always looking backward. Do not let regret ruin the years you have left. Live your life looking forward, Eleanor. That is the only thing I ask of you." She made that promise, and she meant it with all her heart. 1 year later, Eleanor was sitting in her garden. Biscuit was sleeping in a patch of sun near her feet. A cup of coffee was getting cool on the table beside her. The morning was perfect, calm, and entirely her own. She sold her father's massive house and donated most of the money to charities she cared about. She kept just enough to buy a little cottage with a garden, a yard for Biscuit, and beautiful morning light that streamed into the kitchen. The company her father built was now being run by good people. She hired a new chief executive officer she knew she could trust, someone who believed in running a business, with integrity and giving back. Eleanor stayed on the board, but she was not involved in the daily operations. That was not her path anymore. Her new purpose was much smaller and much more peaceful: a home, a garden, and a dog who adored her. She found a career that challenged her but did not consume her, and she had friends who had become her true family. It was a kind of quiet happiness she had fought hard for, and one she had definitely earned. Mo was getting married the following month, and Eleanor was her maid of honor. For the last 6 months, she had been helping with all the wedding plans, arguing about the best flowers, and tasting 14 different kinds of cake. It all felt so normal. It felt amazing. It felt like the life she was supposed to have all along. Sometimes, late at night, she would still think about Grant. It was not with anger anymore, or even sadness. It was more like a mild curiosity about the man she had once called her husband. The person she once thought was her entire world had turned out to be a total stranger. Now, he was out of prison, living in another state somewhere, working a job that no one would ever hear about. His powerful reputation was gone, His business empire was in ruins, and his famous charm had been revealed as the lie it always was. Eleanor never wished him any harm. To be honest, she never wished him anything at all. He was just someone she used to know, a chapter in a book she had closed for good. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Mo. "We have to get brunch tomorrow. I found the ugliest bridesmaid dresses in the world. You are going to despise them." Eleanor laughed as she began to type back. "I cannot wait. Bring on the hideous dresses. I have a lot of opinions." She set her phone down, sipped her warm coffee, and just watched the small birds flitting around her garden. A new thought settled over her. She used to think that needing help was a sign that you were weak, but she now understood it was a sign that you were wise. Everyone needs someone to help them see that the door was never locked to begin with. And she finally understood that the person she had been waiting for all along, the one she hoped would rescue her, was herself. The sun felt warm on her face. Her dog, Biscuit, stretched out, gave a huge yawn, and fell right back to sleep. In the distance, a church bell gently rang the hour. Eleanor smiled, thinking about her mother's letters. She thought about all the moments her mother had written about, but never lived to see, like her college graduation, her wedding, and all of her big career achievements. And then there was this moment, a peaceful morning in her own garden, holding a simple cup of coffee, with a rescue dog named Biscuit by her side, and a new life she had built from the ashes of betrayal. "I made it, Mom," Eleanor whispered into the breeze. "I finally found my way home." A soft wind rustled the flowers, and the birds kept singing their morning songs. And Eleanor Calloway just sat there in her garden, feeling whole, healed, and at last completely free. It was not because a hero had saved her, but because she had finally found the power to save herself. If you have ever felt lost in your own battle, I want you to know that you are not by yourself. This channel is a community where you belong. If this story touched you, please leave a comment and share a little bit of your own story. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to see today. Please be sure to click the subscribe button and turn on your notifications. Every week, we bring you moving stories about courage, healing, and the incredible power we all have to change our lives. Like this video, if you agree that every single person deserves to know their own strength, share it with a friend who might need to hear this message. And now, a quick final thought. This story has been carefully researched, written and edited by our team to share meaningful tales with valuable lessons. Every single character, every single moment, and every single word is chosen to lift you up, to make you feel stronger, and to remind you that no matter how hard life gets, the end of your story has not been written yet. Thank you for spending your time with us today.